Welcome to Radio Omnicore, episode 47, and I'm Colleen McClintock, your host. And this is an episode where we talk about the effect of COVID, but in a very reflexive and interesting way. Some of the standout moments, just really what has changed in the last 2 years, how do we stay with the disruption and use it for learning, and what has actually been the impact for leaders and what can we do about it. Thank you so much for joining Radio Omnicore, Gaby and Terri. I'm so excited to host you today. And we're going to jump straight into the episode and maybe just connect a little bit before we get into picking your brains around our topic today, which is looking at our passion around leadership and making a positive impact with everyone that we work with. So Terri, why don't you do a little intro for our listeners?
Thank you very much, Colleen, and it's lovely to be here and to be in conversation with both you and Gaby. So I'm coming to you from a hot and sticky Sydney in Australia, and I've been working and living in Australia for the last 2 decades, but doing quite a lot of work globally. So really connecting globally, primarily focusing on the work of leadership and deliberately using the term work of leadership because I do think that leadership is not just a role, but a practice. And holding that lens, really trying to support individuals and systems navigate what is often complex environments. So we put a whole lot of pressure on who leaders are and how do we actually enable them and support them. So it's been my kind of life's focus around working in this space. And certainly I know that I've got a whole lot to learn. I'm sure that I'll learn from you both in this conversation. And that's the joy and wonder of working in this space, is that there is imperfection all the time. We don't have all of the answers. We need to kind of let go of that and to be open to what might emerge. So I don't know where this conversation is going, but I am delighted to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
Great. Thank you so much. I agree with you around the imperfection and open to what will emerge. I'm sure exciting stuff is going to come. Gaby, how about you?
So if I think about it in terms of the work that I'm doing now, it feels like an extension, a shift of the work that I've been doing for the past probably 30 years. And so if we talk to role, it's around supporting leaders, both through leadership development programs, partnering with organizations, and a lot of executive coaching, team coaching, working with exco teams in the space of strategy and culture. I think that being here has been very valuable in terms of the reflective practice. And that is something in terms of the way that I work, which is around reflective practice. It's around working and being more deliberate about learning and learning opportunities. It's around a conversation that Terri and I had this week when unconsciously we can slide into spaces and holding up the mirror and inviting or choosing to move into a different place, but being more conscious and more deliberate around it. So if I segue into the experience of being here right now in different time zones, Colleen, to you, thank you. Thank you for the trust and the freedom that you have put in us, in Terri and myself, in partnering both with you, with Omnicore, and your amazing community of coaches. I think that this came out of a conversation and an exciting collaboration where Terri and I have been designing a workshop which is looking at the changing role of leadership, of OD practitioners. And I think, as Terri said, it's a whole lot of questions. It's immersing ourselves in the unknowing. It's shifting from the expert to the learner. And it's really exciting to have that opportunity. Shift to Terri. Terri and I have been working, partnering, collaborating in so many parts of our lives for the last 32 years. It's been real. It's been exciting, and it's just so much about who we are and possibility and potential. So, Terri, to you, thank you always.
I feel like we need a glass of champagne.
Probably. I mean, there's this wonderful kind of, as I sit here, sense of how, and I think this will help us introduce the topic around how has COVID impacted on our work in the world and certainly on leadership. But to be sitting in different time zones and being able to collaborate and share insights, share learnings that really 2 years ago felt like I had to get on an aeroplane to do. It's just this wonderful kind of, learning space. So disruption, whilst really painful for many, can be incredibly useful. So I'm wondering whether that is the kernel around what we want to chat about and your thinking around that, Colleen.
I think that's beautifully foregrounded. And I just wanted to add thank you, Gaby, for the matchmaking and your incredible networking and knowing who to connect. So I also just am feeling very grateful for the opportunity to be in a room with such experienced and insightful OD practitioners and ready to learn. I've got my pen ready to make notes. And Terri, you also beautifully constructed the idea around the conversation today, which was what has COVID done for OD, for leadership. And I was thinking a bit about how being visible in the workplace is so imperative, being seen, and how has that been impacted? Has it been improved? And I would love to just do a few rounds around what has COVID done for the OD practice and leadership.
It's such an interesting thing around starting with visibility because we've always taken for granted that we can be seen. So in a way, it has required a different kind of initiation to kind of land up and be able to engage in different ways. And this is part of the work of leadership, is the paradox or the polarities around hope and despair of this particular moment in time. Because I do not want to push under the table the fact that this has been a pretty nasty experience for many around the world. Loss, grief, fear, anxiety, all of that kind of stuff that we as practitioners need to lean into and work with. However, there is another side to it, and I want to hold that as well, which is what it's enabled in many ways. So what the blurring of those boundaries has been able to provide for us. First thing is we can work and collaborate in very, very different ways. We've learned how to engage and share ideas in a very open, fluid, generous way. I think that shouldn't go unrecognized. I do think that we've reshaped the traditional hierarchy. And it's such an interesting thing. So the pyramid no longer exists. It's, we've always looked at the organization as a pyramid. Leadership as a practice has now been demonstrated from different points within the organization, from a whole range of different points, just not from senior leaders. So that emphasis around it is not a position or a role, it's much more a choice or agency to step into this has been really, really, really important. And finally, and there's a whole lot, but I just want to kind of name the ones that are clear to me, is that if I think about people's conversations in organizations right now, there is a real strong focus more on purpose than on profit. I'm not saying profit or financial sustainability is not important, but people are starting to question values, their own and others, and really looking at how those align. So those are some of the ones, and of course I'm lensing it up pretty much from my own experience, on the other side of the world, from you, Colleen and Gaby. So I'd be interested in hearing from both of you.
If we think about it, and it goes back to Carl Lewin and his theory of change, and we've been talking about it in what was change management, or what is change management, change leadership, is that for change to happen, there are 3 phases. It's unfreeze, change, and then refreeze. And we know that that's iterative and an ongoing experience and cycle. So with COVID came the disruption, the unfreezing that we could never have imagined. It wasn't a choice. It was, we were hijacked. And what was so different is that this happened throughout the world. And I think that in this unfreezing, there's been a phenomenal opportunity to continue this space of disruption. Now it's a choice. It talks to potential. It talks to possibility. Whereas during COVID, we had no choice. We were imprisoned in our homes. We didn't have the skills, the competencies to prepare. And I think recognizing that disruption came with so much. I think if we look at organizations and the adaptation, that very fluidly, organizations moved to online. I know working with Investec, it happened within 3 days. It was the impossible made possible. And this we've seen mirrored in so many organizations. Never before could we imagine a virtual world and technology enabling connection in a space where people felt isolated, and I'll go back to that word of being prisoned. I think, Colleen, you spoke about visibility and being visible. And so what does it mean? I think it's the experience of visibility. It's the physical. It's around moving to coffee places within the organizations. But it was located within the organization, within beautiful organizations, some that had been revamped completely. Visibility was the informal. It was the passage conversations, the pre-caucus to meetings. It was about identity. It was how we dressed, how we showed up, how we conformed to what was expected, how we were grappling with freedom and individuality and, dress codes. I'll go back to that. And this disruption has perhaps refamed visibility. And so what was the experience like for me? Well, firstly, it was learning the technology to be visible. Then it was about who I was having conversations with, being in a place that mirrored where my clients were at. I had no idea where my business was going. I had no idea about the future sustainability of my business. I felt paralyzed by anxiety, and within time was able to think about being creative in terms of how to adapt. I think that visibility was at the risk of invisibility or the experience of invisibility. Being in meetings in many organizations, cameras off. Who was doing what? Trust. How do we know what's being done? Who's accountable for what? And so with disruption, we were confronted with experience in so many ways and so many senses in making sense of the unknown that we lived in and continued to live in. I think working virtually and a visibility which was framed by some distance. I think the experience of looking at someone when cameras are on and having that camera of me and perhaps more of a self-awareness, but not a self-consciousness or shifting from self-consciousness around what that means to engage in this medium. I think that if I look at the work that I was doing with my colleagues and with my clients, the ask was to be more deliberate around connection, around support. The ask was to lead and to engage with compassion without slipping into over-caring, over-nurturing. The challenge was that our work teams became the point of engagement, and to go beyond that boundary of the people that popped up onto our screens on a daily basis required planning diary mapping, and so much more.
I'm trying to understand from what you're saying is whether we were more visible or less visible, whether we had to work harder and what it meant to connect. Was there this desire to connect? Because what I'm hearing is we have learned how to connect in a very different way. I don't necessarily have to go back into an office space to do that. What are we really, I guess where I'm going to is what are we really talking about, and what have we as practitioners learnt about the shift in leadership and our own role? And what have our experiences been around that?
As Gaby's talking, I'm just agreeing with what she's saying and thinking to my own experience, because clearly people have found it valuable. They don't want to go back to work. So with all the challenges that we're facing, there have been a lot of benefits with this approach. I just worry and wonder how sustainable it is from a leadership point of view, from a culture point of view, and then, tapping more into the boundaries and the work-life integration, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit later. But I do, when you go through that whole list of what we've been through, I'm left with the sense of such resilience, and perhaps that no other event would have caused such a massive change. And you pointed out, Gaby, that it wasn't just here, it was global. It was all at once. It was instant, and we had to just show up. So I think visibility has changed, but I think it's something that I struggle with every day, because it depends on the protocols of the meeting, and it depends on how authentic and honest people are being in terms of their own mental wellness and their health and their boundaries. So we do need to be more intentional as leaders to understand and to know where our team members are.
I think that's a really, really good thing, because
yes,
my sense is that COVID didn't shift anything, it amplified what was already there. So the clients I'm working with, when they are talking about challenges, opportunities, issues, dynamics, those are not new dynamics. We can see them clearer. So if we're thinking about visibility, and I'm not talking about individual visibility, I'm talking about organizational, systemic kind of overview of what's going on. I think that the opportunities, and I'm not being Pollyanna-ish about this, I'm not brushing under the carpet the challenges, but the opportunities is that COVID amplified what was already there. And now our work, both from a leadership perspective, but certainly from an OD coaching, learning and development, leadership advisory role, is to be able to not let people slip back very quickly into band-aiding, just taping over the edges, but to be willing to stay long enough in that space to help people make sense of this. So what I noticed was very, very quickly, it started to highlight performance and non-performance.
Yes.
As soon as, very quickly, it started to highlight those individuals that had initiative and those that were inherently, less connected to purpose or outcome. They were just, doing things in their own way. It looked at who we were willing to reach out to and who we were less willing to engage with. Were we seeking like-minded connectedness, or were we working with some of the differences that existed in the system? And that was the work of leadership, and I still think it is how do we switch ourselves on fully and holistically to what the hell's going on around us? And not switch ourselves off, because the same level of visibility or invisibility happened in face-to-face meetings. We noticed some and we didn't notice others. It's no different. It's actually, I sometimes think it's easier in this environment.
T, when you talk about COVID amplified what was already there, I think so much of what was already there was what was swept under the carpet. I think that what was already there was something that was below the iceberg, and how much more comfortable we were to work more at a transactional space as opposed to a systemic space. So my question was, although it was already there, what were the competencies that we developed organizationally to to work with what was now amplified in COVID. I think the point that you made that I'll use visibility, but the performers and the non-performers was so apparent and so quickly was, that both teams and leaders were aware of it. And so if we talk about successful teams, high-performing teams, the feedback that was developing in teams or that exists in teams was around accountability and the challenge of holding people accountable when in personal space people were dealing with, as you said, Terri, grief, loss of financial income, and so much more.
The whole thing around accountability, I have a very strong opinion on what held people steady through this period of time. And that was giving people something to be accountable in some ways. I think that some of the dynamics got amplified again by, and I'm holding a particular position, and please don't see this as complete, but that idea around we have to care, we have to create safe spaces, we have to ensure that people are okay, we have to nurture and love and make people comfortable. I don't know if that was our role necessarily. I don't, from a leadership perspective. I think our role was to recognize and acknowledge the difficulties, the current reality, the challenges within that particular context, and still give people to work with, something to work for and with. So the over-caring sometimes blurred those lines of accountability.
I'm also just thinking, Terri, about how difficult this was for leaders. Nobody knew what was going to happen. I mean, going back to your cycle of change, just everyone was just holding their breath. No one knew. Were the businesses going to survive? Some of them didn't. And I'd love to pick up on the idea of how do we make use of these opportunities in our learning and development experiences.
The first thing I'd say is stop using the language of going back to normal. I mean, it's like this strange thing of like, and it links to resilience in some ways, stretch the elastic. We're resilient if it snaps back and goes back to where it originally was. Let's actually think about creating or co-creating or working with what's emerging. So Gabe, I like the question around competency, because I think there are new competencies. Strategic planning is not necessarily a competency of this age.
Wow.
Strategic thinking, working with emergence, being fully present to what is here, making sense of current reality, engaging with diversity and differences of opinion, creating a number of different scenarios, holding them lightly. That's very different to a competency circa 2019. It's quite different.
In terms of co-creating what's emerging, I think it's also being able to articulate what it is that's emerging, or perhaps what we saw and what we're seeing. And within that, I'm not even going to use competencies, the way that we worked, the new culture, the new ask. And a lot around it was of survival. Mm-hmm. So I think if we go to adaptive leadership, it was a survival mechanism. We couldn't use what we'd learned before. What got us here didn't get us there. And the role of adaptive leadership and adaptive resourcefulness, and Terri, if you can speak more to that. One of the things which was remarkable was the speed of leadership decision-making. Leadership working with purpose, aligned leadership. We saw the capacity to move in the moment, making quick decisions in chaotic times. The excitement of being aligned as a team, as an organization, as a country, in terms of shifts and change. Again, I go back to the decision-making, the risk of decisions in the unknowing. I think from a leadership perspective, collaboration wasn't a choice. It was a necessity. It was, how do we learn together? We saw competitiveness between organizations, between government, parastatals, the corporate world, really collaborating around a common purpose.
That's a great point, Gaby. Can I pick up on your question for Terri to pick up on?
So absolutely. So I'm going to just give you a little lesson on adaptation, because I dropped the whole notion of change. I think change lands up in us in interesting places. It comes back to frameworks, toolkits, and we know it often doesn't get us where we need to go. The terminology, and of course it comes from Heifetz and Linsky around adaptive leadership, is recognizing the process of adaptation. And that is quite a conservative process. It's not something that is kind of hugely transformative. It recognizes that as the context or the environment in which we are operating shifts, we have to shift accordingly. So we see it in the ecology, we see it with animals, we see it with plant life, we see it with human beings. We kind of adapt in that way. The kind of essence of this adaptation, and I think this is an important process and way of thinking for leaders and for us as practitioners, is we need to think about three things. One is, as we move through this way, this kind of COVID disruption, is what of our organizations and even of ourselves as leaders do we want to hold on to? What do we kind of recognize that is so precious to the ways that we operate, to the ways of being, to that link to or align with purpose, that have an impact? That if we got rid of it, we'd no longer see who we are, we would have no sense of what we can bring. We often don't do that. We throw the baby out with the bathwater. We just got to do something completely new. But the second part is, what are we prepared to let go of? And that's why I'm saying let's not go to the snap back to normal, but actually do some real work around discerning what no longer serves. What are the things that are no longer serving us? And we can make generic statements around what that would look like for organizations, but I do think that they're context specific, because some organizations were not fighting for survival. Some made a lot of money during this period. Some grew, in Australia, we were supported luckily by government. So the survival instinct was very different in different parts of the globe. So it's around what do we need to let go of? And loss is a big thing. How do we actually deal with that? And how do we support, from a leadership perspective, our own giving up of? And some of that is giving up assumptions that we had about how our organizations work or our teams work, or actually what high performance is. We have to have those kinds of conversations. And of course, the third piece is around innovation. So what do we have to create or do differently around our way of being in the world? And that's an interesting process to go through. Where we got to in terms of adaptive resourcefulness is that we challenged resilience, because again, resilience was around toughening up, kind of, let's just bear the brunt of this, let's kind of grit our teeth and get on with it and suck it up. And yes, of course, I think that anyone who's still standing through this particular period is resilient. The resourcefulness piece actually talks much more for me to the work of leadership, and is that don't do it alone. We are much more resourced when we're working with people and others, especially others who hold different opinions. So how do we partner with others to make sense around what's going on? The resourcefulness also comes from not accepting status quo, but being willing to question. And we're not very good at questioning. We ask one question and think we're at the end of it. Is to actually hold the mindset of curiosity that says, what really is going on here? What else is going on here? Why do we think this is happening? What else are we seeing? What are we willing to explore? What is making me feel uncomfortable? So Gabe, you talked to seeing and what did we see and how are we seeing? I kind of drop it down from a leadership perspective is, I think it's the moment for holistic leadership, which is trust, not just what we're seeing or hearing, but actually what we're feeling and intuiting. It's a very, very different place.
So interesting.
So I don't know if that resonates with you. It certainly is the way I do my work, and hopefully it has some impact.
I think it's fascinating, and I wonder if it links into the idea then of how do we hold boundaries then for these spaces. What we're hearing a lot is, well, with innovation, you need to be in person. This is not something that can be done online. Creativity is something that needs to be in an office. And I certainly am hearing requests now to go back in person from clients. And a lot of it, I feel, is around control. We need to see you in the office. We need to see what you're doing. And that does feel a bit pre-COVID, to your point. So, yeah, the boundaries bit is interesting for me.
I think some of the conversations that I'm having with clients, with leaders, is around going back to the office and trying to impose a thou shalt be there 3 days, and these are the times to be there, or these are the days to be there. And so in COVID, we had no choice. There was no flexibility. We were imprisoned. But now we have choice. And so, to Terri's point, how do we collectively think about and ask the questions without knowing the answers and being very comfortable in the journey to explore choices? So, flexibility becomes a choice. For some, and we see the great resignation trend and look at the attrition rate in organizations, flexibility is a deal breaker. Mm-hmm. We see the ask for work from home, WFH, and work from anywhere. We see choices that people have made around location, where to live, something which could never have been experienced. So flexibility and autonomy, the ability to choose, can sometimes be in conflict. And so how do we meet people and organizations where they're at, with giving people the autonomy, the freedom to align with the organization's purpose and the need for collaboration? And is this something which can be imposed with the thou shalt? Or is it something which can be co-created with teams? And is it based on being in the office? Or what are other places that we can explore? If we look to creativity, what is the context, the physical space where our team is most creative? Is it in nature? Is it fixed in a place? Is it bound to an office? And I think it's talking to principles aligned to purpose and aligning flexibility and autonomy.
I'm hoping that there has been a maturation through this process. So we've grown up, because and I'm talking about both from a leadership, the role of and practice of leadership, but also from the collective, in that we're prepared to understand what agency means and the consequences of it. And we are prepared to be in conversation around that, because otherwise we're going to revert. We're going to go to a place is that I have to see you in order to trust you. I have to be in an office in order to be creative. Well, do we? We're being creative as we speak. You are thousands and thousands of miles away from me. So how do we hold on to that? Understand people's need for connect and belonging and a sense of location, locating oneself. I understand that. And I think we're going to go through a period of trying to make sense of what that means in organizations and how we work with that. You talk about, I think the organizational boundaries have been blurring for quite a long time. They were just made very, very, very evident by the fact that I could now have a little look into your life. And in some ways, it made us more human. So aren't organizations human systems? And we are now connecting in different ways. I think there is a deliberate, and you've used that word, Gaby, deliberate need to focus on and to build capabilities around and to explore our own assumptions and mindsets around it. Because if we have a mindset that says we can only be creative when I'm sitting next to you and I can literally touch you or smell you, then it's going to start to limit how we do our work in this sort of now global world. So what are some of the, and again, it's not generic, but what are some of the mindsets that need to change? And I mean, I lean back onto two that I need to with my clients. One is how do we create a systemic mindset, which means that I can do my work here and it impacts somewhere else, and we are all interconnected in some way, and we are all therefore resourced better than we think. This is the wonderful thing, is we are much more resourced than we think. And the other one is holding that mindset of deep curiosity. Really just questioning everything that we're doing in a way that says, does this make sense still? And, I need you to do that. I need others to do that with me.
Terri, if I can pick up on the idea of connection, and I think we struggle with that in the virtual world. Anything that you're seeing or any idea of how one does focus on connection in the virtual world, and again, becoming deliberate and intentional? What are your thoughts around connection and this online reality?
If I think about where we are at the moment, is we have created possibilities of new connections that we need to wire ourselves to. So again, it's a bit of a mindset shift where we think that connection is just within our tight community. We go to a place we are connected, a friendship circle, a team, an organization. I think that we have, through this, discovered, practiced, and utilized new ways of being connected. So that doesn't take away that wonderful need to hug someone, to be with someone, to be tactile, to high five them, to share in that shared joy. I think that's important. The interesting thing, and people have asked me how I do my work virtually, and I do have and it will be different for a lot of us, but I don't do any work unless there's a camera on.
Really?
Because it's then I might as well be on a telephone, and it's a very different form of work. It's not saying that it can't happen, and it's not saying that it's not valuable. But if I'm doing my leadership work, whether it's C-suite teams, whether it's individual, whether it's systemic, because I'm picking up cues that you don't even know that I'm picking up. When I'm in a room with you, with a group of people, they can actually see me making eye contact with them. So their behavior, their ways of being changes. When I'm sitting in a remote environment, Gaby doesn't know if I'm looking at her, if I'm looking at Colleen. So in a way we also become less aware of the fact that we are being, and I'm going to use the word scrutinized, but watched and observed in some ways. So what I've found in both coaching individuals and teams is that I've been able to pick up cues, even around their backgrounds or the ways that they operate or where they're sitting, how they kind of move, much easier. Funnily enough, it took a while to learn, to switch that on, because it felt like my brain had to rewire itself. So I don't feel disconnected from people when I'm working remotely.
Terri, when you talk about cameras on, I mean, for me, it's always cameras on, or the ask is always cameras on. But what I've realized is to prepare people up front that it is going to be cameras on, because of the culture of the organization isn't cameras on. And kind of what we're wearing from the waist down still remains hidden. But are we still in our pajama tops as opposed to just our pajama bottoms? So I think it is around anticipating and being on the same page, but being, again, more deliberate around it. I think if we look at how has connection been enabled, and many of the organizations that I'm working with and large financial institutions, together with more startups, are feeling more connected than they've ever felt before. And I think that's been through rituals, through reach, for those weekly, where are we? What have we seen? What are we learning? What are some of the updates? How are we responding? And within that, there is often revisiting to purpose, but there's a common platform that so many people have heard a consistent and the same message, whereas previously it had been diluted, and that was only if members of EXCO had actually filtered down the message and how it was filtered down. So how do we hold on to that connection without resorting to an email or a reliance as before on this filtering down? The discovery of new ways of feeling connected, of being connected, is also be able to acknowledge the individual ask of what connection is. What's the frequency of connection? Where is there, in terms of where the team is at, that connection, in what way that's going to work for the team is non-negotiable. I think we can get into what does it mean for culture around connection, around picking up the cues, and what are we more in tune to? I think that initially for me, it worked well when I had a co-facilitator and we would pick up differently. I think that working somatically has been very important for me and has really come to the fore around what am I picking up, using myself as the instrument, as the barometer for perhaps what might be happening in the team, being more vulnerable around those feelings, stepping into the unknown, shifting from being the expert in terms of the power distance, both for leaders and OD practitioners, becoming much closer. And so expectations of leaders shift. What are the questions that leaders are asking of themselves? What are the expectations? How have these shifted in terms of leadership? How are we taking up leadership and the ask of leadership throughout the organization? And how are we challenging accountability in terms of that?
As we sort of segue into the end of our podcast, to maybe, Terri, if you could talk a little bit about your workshop that you and Gaby will be running, because I think, we've raised a lot of questions, and I'm wondering when we meet in a year's time, where the world of work will be, because while we see the benefits in it, I am concerned that we will lapse back into that pre-COVID traditional space. So how will you be supporting OD practitioners in your upcoming workshop that we're so excited about?
Yeah, so I don't think we will lapse back. I really don't think that we will. I think that we might attempt to, but I'm also very conscious of generational differences. So we're talking through a particular lens and at a particular view on an organization that has a history of, we talked about 20, 30 years of work in the space. Experience matters, absolutely. But I do think there is a very different thing when I'm talking to my daughter around this and what their experience might be. So that's my hope. I can't tell you whether it's true. That's my hope. Our work in terms of working with you, Colleen, and Gaby and I kind of co-facilitating a process, and I'd like to call it a process of learning rather than a program, a process of focusing on, so what do OD practitioners, or I'm using OD in the most generic kind of broad sense, need to start to consider about themselves and how they do their work.
We've positioned the workshop around building coaching and OD capacity to work with systems. The purpose is to create a space to collectively explore the mindsets and skills required to support clients in a changing world. And the way that we're working with it is we're having 4 modules, 90-minute modules, dialogue sessions, which challenge assumptions and narratives that we hold about our work as coaches, as OD practitioners, and as leadership. So if I can just take you through the modules. Firstly, it's around authorizing ourselves as coaches in the system. Terry's spoken to some of that. We're looking at deeper insights of our roles and transacting across boundaries. And then one that's very interesting, it's deliberately raising the heat for the purpose of new insights and learning. I had an experience of it last week, and it was through the heat on reflection where the insights and learnings came out. And then as we spoke to it is recognizing what is below the waterline. So we are very excited to be piloting this program in the next couple of weeks. And once we've done that, Colleen, I think that your intention is that we offer it to your clients, to OD practitioners, and to coaches, and have further conversations in this space.
Thank you, Gaby. And yeah, I think there's a great need when we relate to our clients in the learning and development space, the OD space, the HR space. People are struggling. So I'm excited to partner with you and bring this to whoever needs it. And as we wrap up, maybe just a quick round, I just want to say how hopeful I feel after this conversation. It's really so refreshing and inspiring to listen to both of you make sense and make meaning of what we've just been through. How was the time for you, Terri? What are you left with?
I echo that, and I think that as human beings, trying to use disruption as a process of learning, but also appreciation and acknowledgement of what we have done, what a strong platform we have created to do new and exciting work. So not to get sucked back into a system that is old and traditional. I hold that all the time, and I'm also not naive enough, I'm not naive, knowing that there'll always be this desire to be back in control. So I sit quite comfortably in a place of heat and disruption, but I need to acknowledge that others might not. So I leave this with the kind of where I started with, which is the hope and despair, this kind of sense of being able to manage paradox and polarities. And I appreciate the fact that we can do this remotely, we can do this globally, we can share ideas generously. And so I echo that sense of your hope for what's to emerge.
Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. We really hope you enjoyed the episode. It would help us a lot if you subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. Give us 5 stars if possible, and check out our website www.omnicore.co.za. You'll find our previous episodes and other blogs and helpful resources. And we look forward to connecting in the next episode.